Michael Casey. There's nothing more tiresome than authors using their media and/or speaking engagements to shill their books. But for this opening monologue, I'm compelled to make an opening mention of The Age of Cryptocurrency, the book Paul Vigna and I published in 2015. Many people have told me that the story we related in the early lines of that book is what piqued their interest in it, and more broadly, in Bitcoin. It was a tale brought to me by this week's guest, Francesco Rulli, the CEO of conversational AI company Querlo, and the founder of a new thing called Patronage NFT. When I met him in 2014, Francesco was sending money in Bitcoin to young women in Afghanistan who were studying computing and producing videos for the Women's Annex, a project that he and Afghan entrepreneur Roya Mahboob had founded. In explaining it to me, Francesco opened my eyes to Bitcoin's capacity to empower people by bypassing intermediaries. He explained how, in Afghanistan, it was rare for women to have bank accounts of their own, and that their access to funds sent through the banking system was almost always intermediated by a male family member, such as a father or a brother. His Bitcoin solution upended that. It challenged patriarchal power. That was a very big idea. When we bring Francesco on, we can talk a bit about what happened to that project and his thoughts on the current situation in Afghanistan. But I need to tell you that we've had to pivot today because until a few hours ago, he was going to be joined by Roya, the entrepreneur with whom he worked back then and who is, in her own right, a significant figure in the advancement of Afghan women. You might have heard the story of the Afghan girls' robotics team's spectacular success and the challenges they faced when Kabul fell back into the hands of the Taliban last year. That's all part of Roya's amazing story. Unfortunately, we've just learned that she has had a skiing accident and cannot make it. So beyond the most important point of wishing Roya the best in her convalescence, we had to quickly decide to shift focus today. We'll wait until Roya is fit enough to join us again for a deeper dive into Afghanistan and the role crypto can play in addressing the challenges women face there now that the Taliban are back in power. And instead, we're going to turn this into a special OG edition of Money Reimagined because Francesco's 8-year journey from being an early Bitcoin visionary to his interests now in NFTs, culture, and education is in itself a fascinating one. Before we bring him on, let's do as we always do and say hello to Sheila, my co-host. Hello, Sheila.
Hey, Michael.
So, I don't know, it gets a bit tiresome saying this every week, but this one I got to say it again. It's like, it feels like this is yet another one that's reminded me that crypto time moves faster than other time. I mean, this incredible story of the $3.6 billion worth of Bitcoin that this New York Razadal or whatever her name is.
Yep.
The rapping woman with her role in this, and then the price of Bitcoin suddenly what was all that? Last week we were in the doldrums of a crypto winter, and now apparently we're not anymore. So
there's Chronos time, Kairos time, and crypto time, right? It's a brand new animal, and I can't even get my head around it. I was joking with a friend of ours that there's no way anyone can keep up with everything going on. And the cast of characters, there's just ever new characters that join. I mean, we didn't know about these two until this rapper and the other, right, until this week. But there's just this ever entertaining, I think, cast of characters that are coming through, which is not to say that, the media is focusing on what I think are the right things necessarily. There are a lot of other things that happened in this space that I think were equally exciting this week. They just don't get the kind of press that, the sort of comedy of this video or these meme generating moments kind of obtains. But yeah, two big hearings in Congress on the topics here and move some things forward there, which I think is really powerful.
Good. You're already getting to work, I see.
Exactly. So just as usual, just a tremendous amount going on. But I'm very eager to bring in our guests and to kind of link this to the history of what's come these past. God, it's been over a decade, right? Involved here.
I think Francesco will be a look at these arriving casts of characters and sort of see that from the perspective of somebody who was a very different set of participants back in the days when we first met. So let's bring him in. Hello, Francesco.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
You're most welcome, my friend. Right, so yeah, as people should gather, he and I go way back. Francesco was a formative figure in my discovery of Bitcoin, and the stories that he told me about that project were just amazing. But this is now morphed into, as I said in the monologue, an OG edition. So on that basis, what I'd like you to do, Francesco, is just tell us a little bit about your journey into this space. Like, what brought you here into crypto, and obviously, what the origins of the Women's Annex were, and then we can get into talking a little bit about that.
Okay, so my journey in technology started back in 2004 after an interesting conversation with my former business partner, John Malkovich, the actor, when we had a fashion company together. We're in Milan, and he inspired me to start Filmanics, an online film distribution platform, who basically does what YouTube or Netflix do today. At that time, actually back in 2004, YouTube didn't even exist. So we launched this platform in 2005, very successfully, reaching over 40 million uniques per month in a matter of a year and a half, 2 years. It was back in 2010, 11 that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, contacted us to distribute their content about their peacekeeping efforts. And at first I thought it was a spam. In reality, it was this lady called Zornitska, who was based out in Brussels and offered us over 2,000 videos. So one day I noticed this video about a businesswoman in Herat, and there was a video about Roya Mahboub's office. Along with her, there was her sister, Elaha Mahboub, and Fereshteh Forog, which then they will become three important representatives for their country, based on what they did in the years to come. So I approached Roya, took me like a month and a half, and to figure out how to get in touch with her. And then we started building classrooms in schools in Afghanistan. We started obviously with high schools, because we wanted to get the young students, the female students, early enough so that they would actually build a financial skill that would actually allow them to be financially self-efficient and not be given away for marriage at the age of 13 years old, basically. I always had this perspective in which if you are a financial asset to your family, they're most likely going to keep you close to the family. They're not going to give you away. I also knew this because of my interviews I did the year before to 11 Marines in Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, in which they confirmed the fact that young women were usually given away for marriage for dowry reasons and so on. And this society was really based not just on a conservative perspective from a religious perspective, but also on a monetary need of the families. So, men who can work in the fields have a different value than girls that unfortunately cannot provide the same opportunities. So we introduced the concept of digital literacy and financial literacy through the programs we carried on. It was back in 2012, I was watching the Olympics and I saw some coverage of timing, and I contacted one of the timing journalists, Erin Baker, and coincidentally, she was married to an Afghan man and she was spending her vacations in Italy, and she was fascinated by what we were doing. So she asked me, would you be interested to learn more about Time 100? And that's when I told her, well, if there is someone here to cover about Time 100, it would be Roya Mahboub. So it was a few months later, we received the notification that Roya was going to be included in the Time 100 2013. And that was March 2013, that Roya came to New York to be part of the big event that they usually carry on. That time was in Columbus Circle. And that was right at the time that she spent a couple of weeks, and we went to meet various interesting people. And one of them was Fred Wilson, the venture capitalist. And I explained to Fred that I had the problem. I wanted to introduce the concept of micro scholarships for young women in Afghanistan. And they don't have a bank account. And even if they did, to be frank, the cost of transferring money to a bank account when we talk about small amounts would be prohibitive. So that's how we decided to find the solutions. PayPal was not available. And Fred Wilson said, look into this Bitcoin thing. So it was just a couple of months later, we started implemented Bitcoin payments, and that's how we started in 2013, paying students for their achievements in micro payments, or let's say scholarship in Bitcoin. And that's how the whole thing started.
And like, just explain a little bit about the mechanics of it. So you had them, they had their own Bitcoin addresses, you were sending money to them, but then you also, did you not, like, you created a marketplace for them so they could purchase things, right? How did that work?
Yeah, so what happened, we realized very fast that the concept of showing the names and the locations of the beneficiaries was not a good idea. Malala was a proof of that, right? And to be frank with you, a little controversially, I always felt that BBC or whatever platforms were publishing her blogs should have rewarded her financially. You know, that's my personal perspective. And making a person a target because he or she's voicing certain opinions is not a good idea. So Bitcoin or other forms of cryptocurrency that came later on, they were the ideal solution because they maintain a complete anonymity. So what we did, we switched from Film Annex into Bitlanders and then eventually Women's Annex as a platform where people could acquire their own nickname and be represented by avatars. You know, in line with what's happening now in the NFT world with the Bored Apes, Yacht Club, and so on. But at that time, we didn't introduce the concept of NFTs. We looked at those avatars as a way to maintain anonymity and allow the students and other participants at that point to create content that was meaningful, articles, videos, and so on, right? And based on their quality and the reach of the content, we would reward them, and also the achievements in the classrooms, we would reward them with Bitcoin, all right? So this was the thing. Then I can talk about the Bit license.
Oh yeah, that was that. So yeah, this is all moving along, and you suddenly had to stop.
Yeah, so what happened, for whatever reasons, New York State announced the Bit license, in which was putting us as New York State residents and company based here in a very awkward position, because the requirements of KYC of the Bit license didn't really allow us to proceed forward. And that was then, and that was my first instinct, was like, this is going to impact negatively not so much my finances, because I'm doing okay, but it's going to impact negatively the future of these young women in Afghanistan who cannot count on this. And, you know, I never thought that the Taliban would come back into power so fast. But a few years later, unfortunately, I was proven correct that this would have happened. Now, I understand that the concept of security. Imagine if I send Bitcoin to the daughter or a son of a terrorist, okay? So there is a risk of doing that if you don't do your KYC. On the other hand, you have tens of thousands of young women and men that are financially, they are unable to have access to financial independence because obviously they probably, you know, they lost the opportunity to work with us back in 2015, 16 is when this big change happened. And I hope some of them kept their wallets, but I don't know how many other platforms were providing the type of financial opportunity and also digital literacy opportunity.
You know, it's really powerful. You point out exactly the tension. I mean, I think there is part of the KYC AML rules are designed to prevent funding to go to antisocial activities like terrorism. But the consequence is that they sweep up an awful lot of people who aren't engaged in such activity, who aren't able to have access to some of these potentially life-changing opportunities. It's really powerful to just kind of contemplate what it might have been like now in Afghanistan if this project had continued. You'd have these women coming through Royal School, you know, they're earning Bitcoin, maybe they're producing NFTs, they're financially independent, and what that might have meant for Afghanistan, the country, right, as the Taliban moved back in or began to amass power and make the moves that it made. It's really interesting to think about. My undergraduate thesis was actually it was called Gender Bias in the Allocation of Healthcare to Infants in India. And it was similarly studying the dynamics among girl and boy children in states in India that at that time were having high rates of female infanticide, and kind of reflecting on how it's not just resources and money, it's also even basic healthcare that fuels this myth, frankly, that girls are weaker than boys or of less value financially to the family because they don't have the ability to kind of go work in the fields or whatever's needed. That attitude persists in many parts of the world. And it's something that I do think all of us are really, we see potential in Bitcoin and in cryptocurrencies to help address that imbalance or that inaccuracy in the perception. But I'm curious, Francesco, to ask you, how do you see this now? You know, you clearly had an idealistic, I would say, view of the technology back then at the time. How do you feel about kind of the state of play today? We've got a lot of people who are really in crypto, focused on speculation, focused on hopefully making a quick buck or flipping an NFT quickly. What's your take on all that, and how do you feel about it?
All right, so this is a little controversial. I do believe that philanthropy is empowered by a financial stability and strength of people like, obviously, the Gates Foundation is an example, right? So the most powerful and wealthy people in the world that can gather together and they can create something very, very impactful, okay? But on the other hand, I think that the philosophy of cryptocurrency, the decentralization concept, wasn't meant to be a speculation opportunity. And it saddened me when I see that there is an alignment between what happens in the markets and what happens on the crypto space, simply for speculation purpose, right? I do believe that crypto was created for the unbanked. I think that the book of The Age of Cryptocurrency covers that very well. Also the personal experience of Michael living in Argentina and so on. So, you know, and at the end of the day, we gotta look at this opportunity for everybody. And it's very sad for me when I talk about it and people ask me, when do you get into this space? I say 2013, oh, you have to be so rich. And it saddened me. All right, maybe I'm not doing so well, too badly. But on the other side, don't you see there is something beyond that, all right? And, you know, there is a purpose for me for being on the blockchain and empower people to provide the best. We are starting now a collaboration with a very interesting organization here in New York City, for example, that handles almost 100 schools, 10,000 students in the low-income neighborhoods, and to empower these kids to create a financial opportunity and also a communication opportunity within their own benefits, right? Because when you post a video on YouTube or a picture on Instagram, I don't know if the financial benefits trickle down to the person who did that as much as if they had some control issuing their own NFTs and having their own access to their own MetaMask wallets and so on, right? So I think this digital and financial literacy is going to be very, very important. And slowly, I think, is going to balance between speculation and actually the social good that cryptocurrency can do, in which I'm a big fan of. Okay. So.
You know, Francesco, you mentioned philanthropy and that part there. And I know that you've got this new project, Patronage NFT. Maybe walk us through how you've gotten there, because you've been working in addition to you work on this conversational AI, these AI chatbots, is sort of your mainstream work. But sure. You're the chief digital officer, let's say it, of l'Opera del Duomo, right? The entity that runs the museum of the Cathedral of Florence, and you've been thinking, at least, I think that probably, if I'm right, that's inspired you to think about how funding, the patronage and philanthropy of institutions like that could work with crypto and NFTs and things. Can you talk a little bit about where your ideas are at?
Okay, so let's actually go back to 2015. We had some problems with the Bitcoin distribution and also with the Afghan government at one point. And that's when we decided to transform our entire digital education into the use of artificial intelligence. So instead of just having teachers in the classrooms, we implemented chatbots to educate young students in Farsi. Okay, I learned incredibly a lot from Roya Mahbub, her sister Elaha, and Ferishte Foruk. And I realized that if you can succeed in such a difficult environments, you can actually be very successful in less difficult environments. So that was back in 2015 that I launched Querlo, the artificial intelligence company, in which it was launched for social responsibility purposes, education. But then we started servicing companies like IBM, Pfizer, HSBC, and so on. So you fast forward a couple of years, it's about 2.5 years ago, I met a couple of people at the Duomo in Florence. I was visiting my family there. And I proposed them the introduction of artificial intelligence and to bring back to life some of the artists. And one of the artists was Michelangelo. So the first thing we did is the resurrection of Michelangelo. We started building a chatbot. We gathered a team of experts and scholars, and we built the first 100 intents. So that's when I got the title of Chief Digital and Cognitive Officer for the Duomo of Florence. You know, this institution with 725 years of history has an incredible wealth of knowledge that will be implemented, is being implemented, has been implemented in the artificial intelligence. And we have been able to answer over 40,000 questions as of today, growing from 100 intents to 500 intents. Same thing we're doing with the David, that is not just now the artist, now is the subject of the artist or the biblical character. We're launching now Leonardo da Vinci, working on Christopher Columbus, so different people part of history, also controversial people. So that's how we got into this space, right? Then COVID hit, and obviously COVID hit and the NFT space hit. And I had a little bit of an epiphany saying, well, if institutions like the Duomo, that they cannot sell tickets anymore, they are going through a financial crisis, and this new world is opening up, why not to welcome them into this space? So what you see behind me here is what we call the universe of Michelangelo. So in the middle here, we have a symbolic Michelangelo is Nicodemus, but is actually his self-portrait, in which is what he carved just before his death as the statue of the Pietà that we have in Florence. And all the other people that you see around are the patrons of the arts that supported Michelangelo back in the day in which he was working to achieve what he achieved. All right. So for me now, the blockchain is also an opportunity to issue non-fungible tokens for patronage purpose. So we go back to the purpose before you issue the let's say the token or the NFT, whatever it is, and then build the new layers around of those new patrons of the arts or education or even medical research, because the same concept applies, so that you can actually measure your impact. Visually, you can see how far you are from the center of those universe. In the middle of this could be, for example, I don't know, the Stanford University Department of Clinical Anatomy. So if I want to contribute to that organization, why not give support, but also see what is the universe of that space, right? And that's what we have been working on, is to help institutions, museums, and also educational institutions to gain the space of NFTs for a patronage purpose. So we're not selling an NFT for the purpose of speculation, in which it can happen. So you can buy an NFT for 10 and sell it for 20, that's great. But the purpose of the 10 is to support a specific venture, and then a percentage of the secondary market, so that that patronage continues in, forever, and supports the organization, an annuity or a form of endowment, let's say. So that's where we are today.
So this is really interesting, right? Because when we think about NFTs, there's always this equation with kind of luxury goods and this idea that you have, your status or your bragging rights or some ability to kind of say, I have this thing, and, I'm part of this elite group of whatever it might be. And, and the implication being, and you're not. And here you're kind of taking that and you're making it a bit more pro-social, I would say, because you're saying it's really about modeling and demonstrating your support for a cultural institution or whatever it might be. So how do you see that extending into outside of kind of like a classically understood institution, like a again, like the Duomo or like similar kinds of institutions, into almost kind of a brand focus or celebrities or things like that? Do you think that there's an element of conversion from this kind of status symbol, luxury goods sort of model into something more like support or this kind of thing? That do you see that being something that is extensible across a variety of different cultural spheres, or do you see it as something that's going to kind of be dependent upon the relationship historically that a patron had with the institution, right? Is that question clear? Kind of like, I see these as kind of oppositional in a way, even though they're basically facilitated by the same thing, the same NFT concept. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I believe that younger generations care a lot about social matters, right? So there is an understanding that the failure of Afghanistan, for example, will impact everybody's life, right? So if you are successful in your personal life from a financial perspective, or you're successful in your gaming life, or you're successful in your metaverse life, and you display on a screen just like the one behind me, your beautiful NFT, because you were able to acquire that $500,000 avatar of something that proves your status, right? I think we can add a layer of patronage to this so that we give a purpose to the money or to the tokens or the points that are associated to that transaction, okay? So I don't think humans are born to count money in the bank. They're born to have a cause to pursue, right? Maybe it's your personal education, the education of your children, to bring peace to your country or flourish business in your region. I think that comes before. I don't think that someone is a little baby and say, I want to be a rich guy. I mean, some people say that, but mature brains, they look at the purpose, right? What's your purpose every day? If it's simply making money, then why not selling drugs, right? So the bottom line is there is a purpose. And I think that blockchain, cryptocurrencies have a fantastic purpose. It's the intrinsic opportunity to bank the unbanked, and which is the number one priority for everybody who is in the banked side, right? So you're in a place where your banks give you a fantastic service. You gotta make sure that this opportunity is spread into those countries and regions where it's not. So giving a purpose, it's important, right? That's all.
Yeah. So we had Kevin Roos, the New York Times economist on, New York Times columnist on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, Francesco. And we talked about NFTs and what they mean to people. And he was talking about like it's this showing off thing, right? Partly that is all it is. But we talked a little bit about how that's actually a huge part of the economy generally, that really so much of what our expenditure is on things that, whether we like it or not, we can sort of try to argue that we're very utilitarian. I only wear shirts for shirts purposes. This is all practical. But no, we think about the way we look, and therefore we think about what we're signaling, right? And I think this is where this NFT concept is like inherently there. Like, I am the owner of the authenticated first version. I don't control the actual media, but I at least can say to you, I can brag to you, I'm it. So this signaling aspect of it, right? And that's always been a part of philanthropy, whether we like it or not, right? I mean, there are a few people who donate anonymously, but an enormous part of the philanthropic industry is so that the Koch brothers, for example, can put their name on the New York Met, or the Sackles. I'm naming all the evil ones here, but there's a lot of good people as well who do put their names on projects because it's part of their ability to claim that they, it's signaling, it's who they are. And this is what I think is really interesting about this idea of yours, this patronage NFT concept, because when you go back to the image behind you, you've got this provenance that these museums have. I mean, I know because you've told me about this, that the Cathedral of Florence, its patronage goes right back to the Medici. And the Medici are, critical figures, not only in the beginnings of the Renaissance, but the beginnings of banking, and therefore in some respects in the beginnings of blockchain, because it is precisely the act of sort of trying to disintermediate the system that the Medici created that makes this thing so powerful, right? So the idea that we could tie a contemporary NFT now with its immutable stake in a blockchain to this other pre-blockchain history, and now it contains within it my place in that universe as you're describing it, that picture there, and I can make that claim. That seems like a pretty big thing to be bragging about. And I might not have the statue of David sitting here in my hotel room, as you can now see I'm in, but I can have that claim that I have made this possible, and that I am in this long line of significant figures. I think that's a pretty valuable idea. Like, and I'd like to break this down again. Maybe Sheila, you can weigh in, because
yeah. Well, I was going to say, there's this
Yeah.
concept in child psychology for young children around 2 or 3 who are starting to kind of come into their own as an identity, have an identity themselves. Because up until about that age, you see yourself as an extension primarily of your mother. So you don't understand and perceive the difference between you and your mother. At that age, you start to develop identity. And so what they say is when you're praising your child for helping you by carrying something or whatever, you don't say thank you for helping. You say you're such a great helper. And that subtle shift in giving them the name for what they are and giving them the pride of like, oh, I'm a helper. Like in my house, we talk about, oh, you're a reader now, right? Like, oh, I'm a reader, right? Like I'm a cyclist, hilariously, right? Whatever it is, we try to almost noun the verb to kind of say, this can now be part of your identity. You can take that or leave it. And I think this shift is so powerful towards saying, I own the art by so-and-so, I am a patron of the artist so-and-so. And it's really, it sounds subtle, but it's really quite profound, because I do think that what we're talking about here is how do we support culture in a way that makes us all feel like we truly are part of contributing to this ongoing cultural identity that we have as human beings in a society. And that is more than just the sort of more selfish orientation towards ownership or exclusivity, but I have it, you don't have it. It's more, I am part of a community helping to sustain this thing that is beautiful or that is important or that is whatever it is. And you can see this applying to things beyond the arts into nature and conservation, right? I mean, Michael, we've got friends who are engaging in conservation NFTs, and that was an early kind of case to say, not just how do we fundraise around this, how do we get people to really feel invested and think of themselves as naturalists or as conservators, right? Or people who are playing an active role in shaping the ecosystem that we live in. So all of this is fascinating. And I confess, thought about the lineage of this all the way back to the Medici or whatever it might be, and depending on the jurisdiction that you're in or the country that you're in. But there is something to be said about being able to self-identify, in this lineage and this legacy of powerful supporters of the arts or whatever it might be. Maybe it's, John Muir, if you're a naturalist or whatever it might be, that I think could really provide, a boost to some of the things that I hope as a society we're going to continue to prioritize, or maybe start to prioritize depending on where you are, as we move into a world that is more technically intermediated. We've got more digital screens, screens between us and others. And frankly, where we have less and less land available, because of climate change and other things that make it scarcer and scarcer and more and more in need of protection.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that the NFT itself can be a medium of education that is very powerful. That one image or one short GIF or video can educate people about both the philanthropy and the patronage of the owner, but also about the positive impact. So I would love to see more artists and more institutions issuing NFTs with the purpose, right? So that the intrinsic purpose is education. And that's a little bit what the arts were at one point. I mean, the Renaissance was all based about creating this metaverse of cathedrals and squares, and it was even going back to the Greek times and the Egyptians, in which basically the human is basically an avatar. Because if you look from that perspective, it's an opportunity to grow your space around you. Now we have technologies that are interactive. So I think that NFTs have a big responsibility to carry on a human civilization in a positive route and keep everybody included, because that's another aspect. The Metropolitan Museum here in New York has an endowment for $3.3 billion, right? So they can afford doing a lot of interesting things. But there is a lot of other regions in the world where nobody will be able to ever go into a museum. Nobody will be able to even go to a university or travel to New York. So it's our responsibility to take those digital assets, make them available, and provide them inspiration and also financial security. And that's the great work that Roya, Elaha, and Fereshteh have carried on in Afghanistan. And there is a little bit of an underground movement to keep those guys back in business in a region, where it's so difficult. So I'm positive about the future.
Yeah, looking forward to talking to Roya when we do get her on to talk about what that underground mission is all about. But like you're alluding there, I think, Francesco, to the metaverse, right? So there's this digital world, this digital way to experience art and culture and history. Is that the future for museums, or a future for museums? One would hope that we would still have the physical experience of going into the Florence cathedral, but is there a realm now where the world can be invited to the metaverse version of Italy to look at these things? Yeah.
Well, let's look at what Ubisoft has done, which is incredible with Assassin's Creed. For years, I told my kids, "Oh, don't play violent video games." And then I realized that they learn a lot from Assassin's Creed because they can be in the middle of Florence, in the middle of Paris. Now it's time to create that connection between the gaming, the metaverse, and the cultural assets, and create an experience that is less violent and more educational, but is also more exciting than just flying to Florence. So when you're 12 years old and going to the Uffizi Gallery, I totally understand it's going to be boring. I had a trip to the Vatican museums, and this young woman had the equivalent of a scavenger hunt for my children to find the specific statues. We had the best 3.5 hours. So we got to gamify the arts and education. And that's also what we're doing now with the University of Florence, creating artificial intelligence solutions so that there is more of a gamification relationship to education in mathematics. But also we have to accept, to be objective. Those video games exist. Kids enjoy driving cars very fast and maybe shooting a K-47, in which I'm not a fan for, but I'm saying if Mohammed doesn't go to the mountain goes to Mohammed, and vice versa. So we gotta be present in the environment. And that's why avatars, NFTs are going to be assets that are going to provide that educational layer and financial opportunity for both the users and the institutions that are present in that space.
All right, that's. I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to wrap up here, Francesco. That's a great place to leave it. But thank you for being with us today. But thank you also for being somebody who keeps everybody focused on that North Star. That this is not about just getting rich. That this is something really, really powerful about who we are as human beings and how we be in the world, and how we find in these technologies solutions that allow us to sort of perpetuate that and sort of spread that to the world. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both.
Thank you, Sheila, as always, for being here. Always a pleasure, always a joy. And thank you to all of you for joining us on the latest edition of Money Reimagined. Come back next week for another one.